Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Trustee Dan McLean, Chair of the Finance, Budget, and Enrollment Committee. Today is Thursday, January 9th, 2025. I would like to call this meeting to order and welcome committee members, trustees, staff, and members of the public. At this time, I would ask all people that are present in the room to please rise for the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas, of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Miigwech. You may be seated. The next item is the approval of the agenda. Tonight, we have one item to be added. Please note that for everyone present, it's in the blue folder, and for everybody online, you should have received an email with the item in the blue folder. The item to be added is the report from the Urban Indigenous Community Advisory Committee report from November 26th, 2024. We will add it to be 5.0 or 5.01, depending on your preference, but we're going to do it before contract awards. So I need a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as modified.
Trustee Earhart will move.
Wong will second.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart and Trustee Wong. We'll just do this quickly verbally. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Opposed, if any? And that passes. Item number 3 are declarations of possible conflict of interest. Trustees have had a chance to review the agenda and recommendations. Are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest? Hearing and seeing none, we will move on. Number 4 is delegations. Tonight we have no delegations, so we will move to the next item on the agenda, which is our added item, and I'll remind everybody it's in the blue folder. The next item is the Urban Indigenous Community Advisory Committee report from November 26th, 2024 regarding the hiring of Indigenous Pathways as a recruitment firm. At this time, I invite Trustee Williams to present.
Thank you. And through the chair. So in front of you is the recommendation that has come out of the Urban Indigenous Community Advisory Committee. I'm the trustee co-chair on the UICAC and was in attendance at the meeting of November 26, 2024, when this recommendation was passed unanimously by the UICAC with full support and endorsement of the Elders Committee. So the recommendation, as you'll see on the screen, whereas the Urban Indigenous Community Advisory Committee, UICAC, met on Tuesday, November 26, 2024, and whereas the Urban Indigenous Community Advisory Committee unanimously supports the recommendation to the board to hire Indigenous Pathways recruitment firm to assist in the hiring of Indigenous staff to lead the Urban Indigenous Education Center and Kapapamachwe Wandering Spirit School. And whereas the Indigenous Elders Council fully endorses this recommendation, and whereas the source of funding has been identified as funds enveloped for Indigenous education. And the recommendation, therefore be it resolved, that Indigenous Pathways, now operating as Pathways Executive Search, which is an Indigenous-owned recruitment firm based in Canada, be hired to assist in restructuring of the internal Indigenous leadership team and roles, and assist in the recruitment of up to 5 Indigenous people to lead the Urban Indigenous Education Center and Kapapamachwe Wandering Spirit School. There was quite a bit of discussion at that meeting regarding this recommendation. And as it's stated in the recommendation, fully endorsed by the Elders Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Williams. Does anybody have any questions about the report? Did staff want to speak to the report?
I see a question in the chat.
Through the chair, I will just say that staff has been simultaneously working through this process, and it is expected that this will be on contract awards at the next FAC meeting, which is on January 29th.
Thank you, Director Zucker. Trustee Earhart.
I think that my question was just answered. And so just a thank you to Trustee Williams for speaking to this item today, and very happy to hear this will be coming to FAC for consideration. Would we still want to, if there are no other questions, would we want to refer this to staff then for consideration and to return to FAC then?
Yeah, at the end of the questions, we will be looking for a motion of referral.
Okay.
That clearly establishes the expectation that it will appear back on January 30th.
Okay, I'd be happy to move that motion.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other questions either in the room or online, I will take the motion from Trustee Earhart, and I need a seconder.
Trustee Davies would like to second.
Trustee Dudas, thank you for joining us, and thank you for seconding, sir. We will open the vote, please. Sorry, that the motion be referred to staff.
Trustee Earhart in favor.
Davies in favor.
Wong in favor. Oh, it's coming up now. Okay.
Trustee Patel, can you share how you vote?
I'm in favor, Chair.
Thank you, sir.
And Chair, Trustee Lee is here too. I'm in favor.
Trustee Lee has joined, and he has voted in favor. We have you as absent, but we will modify the record, Trustee Lee. So that passes 7-0. Thank you. Next, we will move on to item 5.1, which is contract awards. First, it's 5.1. There are 3 sections to this. A and B will be for receipt. We will deal with that together, and we will deal with that first. At this time, I invite Senior Manager Beth Manathan to provide us an update.
Thank you. Good evening. Through you, the chair, I'd like to present the contract awards for facilities for board approval. We have 5 items in Appendix A, 2 items in Appendix B, and 2 items in Appendix C. I will open the floor now for any questions.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions on items A, B, or C at this time? Okay, hearing and seeing none, we will first vote on, I'll look for a motion for receipt for items A and okay, we'll vote for the 2 items for A and B for receipt and item C for approval. We'll do that all together. I need a mover and a seconder, please.
I can move it.
Thank you, Trustee Patel. Trustee Hassan will second. Can we open the vote, please?
In favor.
Trustee Wong, Trustee Lee, can you share how you vote, please?
Trustee Lee is in favor.
Thank you, and that carries 7-0. The next item is item 5.2, which is contract awards. This is on page 13 of the agenda. This is for approval. At this time, I ask, I understand Senior Manager Pathmanathan will provide an update.
Thank you. Through you, the chair, I'd like to present the contract awards for operations for board approval. We have 2 items in Appendix A and none in Appendix B and C, and I'll open up the floor for any questions.
Thank you. Do you have any trustees have any questions about these 2 matters? Hearing and seeing none. Can I have a mover and seconder for a motion for approval? Trustee Hassan will move.
Wong,
Trustee Wong will second. Thank you very much. Can we open the vote, please?
Trustee Lee is in favor.
Trustee Patel in favor.
Trustee Erhard in favor.
And that passes 7-0. Thank you. The next item is item 5.3, which is the 2024-25 revised estimates, which is on page 19 of the agenda. This report is to be received. This time, I ask Executive Officer Schneider to take us through this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, or good afternoon, I should say, trustees and our members of the public. So in front of you tonight is an update on our revised estimates. School boards are required both to submit their original budget by the end of June and by the end of November, submit their revised estimates of any changes to that budget. For context, back in June, the board approved a budget that used 28 million of proceeds disposition to balance the budget. And in August, the ministry required us to present a 2-year option to balance that. That was presented to the board and received, and we're waiting final approval on a 2-year plan from the government. The financial position as of December has not changed, is the good news. There have been ups and downs that are noted in this report, and we will take you through that in detail as well. I'd like the opportunity, as always, to identify the risk with any projection that goes forward. So one of the big changes you'll see in this document is that at the estimates, the ministry did not want school boards to include all the salary benchmark changes. That was to be undertaken by the ministry to update the benchmarks in the revised estimate cycle and for school boards to update their salary costs. So you'll see significant numbers in this report relating to that update of the benchmarks. So the first item on page 21, I'm going to go through with you in detail, is a change in the ADE. ADE is the average daily enrollment for funding purposes, and that takes the October 31st count of students and the March 31st count of students and divides it by 2 for funding. So it is still a projection at this point in time, but currently we are projecting a decline overall of 332, 504 in elementary and 172 positive in secondary. And on page 22, we did put a separate section in the report to identify why there was a change as opposed to what planning provided you with September enrollments. So just to recap, the September enrollment is a flashpoint of that day of what the enrollments look like in the system. Several things happen from September 31st to October 31st. And obviously our planning department takes the October enrollment and projects it to March 31st. So in the enrollment in elementary, where the significant change happened was the change in the count date due to expense data cleanup was larger than we normally experience. So we did see a change, you'll see in the chart, by grade level where it was between JK to grade 3 and grade 4 to 8 actually grew in enrollment from our budget to revised estimates. Secondarily, why we saw an increase in the secondary enrollment was the retention rates we're experiencing and are projected to experience are higher than we anticipated when we built the budget. So we did see an increase of 171, and the planning department is here with me this evening to answer any further questions when we complete our presentation, should there be any. So the next item you'll see is the core education revenue offset. You'll see that between the budget time to when they changed the benchmarks and the formula, it was $112 million additional revenue. And you'll see, if I went down the lines identified as line 4, you'll see that almost the equivalent labor changes happen as well between the school-based staff update of their benchmarks, the central staff, as well as future employee benefit cost came in at 107. So there was a slight positive experience. However, there's some other areas that still have to come forward. In addition to those revenue changes in the core ed funding, the Ministry of Education did give a subsequent grant September 1st for Bill 124, and we recognize that expense as well in these projection, and we attributed the revenue from that grant for that. There's a little small portion of that grant left for us to use what we expect to be when our actuary does our future employee benefit calculations and WSIB comes back to with their calculations, that the rest of that grant will be spent to offset those costs. The interest earnings was higher than our projections based on what we anticipated the interest rates going at the central bank. So we see a positive experience of $3.2 million there. Our lease income was up $1.3 million. This primarily a property that we share with the City of Toronto, and the disbursement of the accrued revenues from that site were higher than we expected. We did see a decrease in permit revenue of $1 million, and this is due to the delay in implementing the permit rate changes from what our forecast was at the time we built the budget. As you are aware, the federal government has changed the immigration patterns for the country, and as a result, we're seeing about 224 less pupils than our forecast back in the spring, which results in about 3.2 million negative variance. So in revenue, we are seeing an overall growth of between the 109 and the 17.5. As far as cost changes, I spoke about the staffing benchmarks earlier, and with the benchmark changes and the impact it has on future employee benefits, we see about $107 million increase in our costs compared to the forecast. In facility operations, we had a couple of concerns. One is around our maintenance. We're experiencing a higher cost of maintenance than we forecast. And this is really a couple of things coming into play. The first being that we are maintaining a larger infrastructure, and the infrastructure is aging at a rate, and it causes higher maintenance costs to us. The other being obviously inflation, impact of inflation on the cost for materials and labor. So we did see a $9 million higher than we expected maintenance costs that we will be reviewing as we build the 25-26 budget to see. We had tried to constrain that budget as much as possible, not to influence program, but as a result, we have a $9 million variance. On utilities, we had a true-up in cost between the cost of utility increase rates as well as the impact of carbon taxes that saw a $2.1 million variance. The last two items, the supply costs, there's good news here. We had forecast, as you know, in the budget to have 10.5 million of savings. We have achieved 6.8, which leaves us 3.7 pressure to the bottom line that we weren't able to meet. So the initial target staff presented of 7, we're at 6.8, and that's where we're at. The last is about 4.8. This is across various departments, impacts small things like contract rate increases and other costs that were unavoidable. So as I said, overall, the good news is we are on our projection. The pluses and minuses all equal out to each other, and we'll continue to monitor this and update you both with our first quarter report, which will be basically the same as this, as well as our second quarter, both forecast or the first 6 months of activity, as well as we'll forecast out to year end at our second quarter report. The next thing I would like to talk about for a moment is the risks to this forecast as it sits. So we've been very diligent in looking at our supply costs and trying to forecast using last year's supply cost trends and this year's supply cost trends to ensure that we're doing an accurate forecast for you. But again, as always, if our experience that we're expecting to see in supply costs does not meet our objective, then there could be a pressure there. Our self-funded insurance, both LTDI and WSIB, we continue to monitor these costs, and we're working with SBCI, or School Board Cooperative Carrier, to report increases in long-term disability as well as worker compensation. And as I said earlier, we are waiting for WSIB to complete their analysis of the impact of Bill 124, if there's any retro payments there we have to do. The next area that I'd like to highlight as a risk, and we'll talk about it both in this report and in the next report, is the status of our internal and working funds. In the chart you'll see on the next page, I'll talk to it in a moment, we have almost exhausted our reserve funds. So to offset any future deficits, the board has limited ability to do that. And of course, as always, the last risk is around inflation. Hopefully inflation stays within the current parameters that we're seeing. But if there should be a change in the inflation, whether it be in any one commodity or group of commodities or overall inflation, that would have an impact on the forecast we're presenting. I'll draw your attention now for a moment to page 24, and this is the reserve status. And again, the next report will go a little bit more detail. But as you can see on this page, our reserves currently are sitting at 16.7 in total, but they are reserves against certain activities, and I'll outline that in the next report. So we are at a point where we have less than 0.5% of reserves to cover off any change in the forecast or unexpected events. So through you, Mr. Chair, I'll stop there, and we're happy to take questions. And again, I'll take a moment to thank both the finance staff as well as facilities planning and people and culture for all their help in preparing this information.
Thank you, Executive Officer Schneider. Is there anyone in the room that has questions or online? Seeing none, I'm going to, oh, there we go. Trustee Lee, the floor is yours. Trustee Lee? You're on mute, sir.
That was my bad. Am I good now?
Yep, you're good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I just want to thank all of our finance staff for putting this today's report together, especially on the updated financial position. I just want to highlight some of the achievement and the work that we have done to get to where this point is. If I, so the executive officers mentioned this in his presentation, but at the beginning of this year, or before the beginning of this year, when we're setting the budget, we had a stretched line item asking our people or culture team to, find ways to reduce staff absenteeism. And at the time, staff had, a number that they're looking to achieve, and the board stretched staff to a higher number to see if we can get it better. And from what I'm hearing right now is we got to around 70 to 75% of what that target was. And I think this is a tremendous achievement, just because, when you have an aspirational line item, when you go out and you try to achieve certain things, there's, no guarantee that all of those will work out and we'll get to the number that we want to get to. But from this report, it seems like we got to most of that. And I think that is something to be celebrated. And we should really congratulate Associate Director Pon and her entire team, along with all of her staff, for, not only, achieving a lot of the finance goals that we set out to do, but also, in a way, improved our students' classroom experience by, making sure that they have their full-time teacher on a more consistent basis, and also improving fill rates. I can only assume this means that fill rates would have improved some way or somehow. And all of this is netting out to a net zero revised financial position for this year. Albeit with caveats, I think this is the first time in a long time that we have seen the net zero number at this point in a fiscal year. So I think that is something that we should be proud of as a board. Yeah, that's all I wanted to mention. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to receive this report.
Thank you, Trustee Lee. At this time, I'm going to pass the chair to Trustee Hassan. No, I want to ask you questions.
I'll take the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I, like my colleague, Trustee Lee, think that the numbers, for the supply costs are it was really ambitious, the projections that we made, and it's great to see that we're moving in that direction. And I thank everyone and the people in Culture Department for all the effort, and the staff that have responded to the challenge. And so that's great to see. I do have a question, though, as it pertains to interest rates. Does the number, interest rates have fallen, a little bit since their high points, and the projections were a year ago. And so I'm wondering, are we at risk for the latter half of the year because interest rates have fallen? Or are they presently at a level that you were projected? Or is there still some room that, we're even at the reduced interest rates that are in the marketplace, are we still generating above what was initial, we're traditionally conservative when we're doing that. So are we still above that, or does this represent a potential risk in the last half of the year?
So thank you, and through you, Chair, and Stephanie Harris is online. If I stray too far off, that she can step in. But I think what I would say is that right now, with the interest rates, when we built the budget, we were very conservative because we had heard the rumors of multiple cuts and going down. So we hedged our bet not to create risks for the board. And right now, in the trend we're seeing, and we are talking with our bankers on a regular basis to make sure we're understanding the options and how we are saving the money, putting it in either term investments or where we're placing the money to make sure that we're yielding the highest yield. So the risk would be, right now, it seems to be a relatively stable interest environment. I will say that it doesn't sound like there's going to be major drops over the balance of the year. In fact, it sounded like the U.S. Reserve decided that the economy in the U.S. is picking up, so they're not going to do any. Of course, Canada is different. But if the rates drop larger than we're expecting the balance of the year, that 3.2 could go down to $2 million, for example, or it could go down to zero, that our forecast was correct. But right now, what we're seeing, we anticipate $3.2 million of revenue above what the initial budget back in June forecasted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That completes my questions, so I will take back the chair, sir. Thank you. And seeing no other, Trustee Williams?
Thank you, and through the chair. So to staff, I just have a question. If you could elaborate and clarify on this school budget carryover, what you're describing as school support fund. Are those expenses that have not been paid yet, costs that have not been paid yet, mostly?
Through the chair, no. What in essence is, for example, in Blue School, if they have a budget of $10,000 and they only spend $8,000, we will carry forward that $2,000 for them to use the next school year. So the school support fund is that difference of what we gave them historically versus what they spent. And again, as you're aware, you approved a year ago that we only hold up to 25% of unspent money to their total budget. So in my example where the budget was $10,000, they had unspent $2,000, we carry that $2,000 forward into the next year for them. If they had $3,000 unspent, we will only cover $2,500 of it. But that balance that you're seeing in that reserve is assuming they're going to use the money in a future year.
Thank you, through the chair. That was my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we open it up, can I'm going to pass the chair back. Sorry, Trustee Hassan, the chair. I'll pass the chair to you. Can you, at our recent board meeting, we voted to spend an additional $500,000 or the amount that will be required through the municipal election of the trustee, that the vote that will take place in March. And at the, we talked about the $2 per student. Can you take us through that and explain how that will work and what would happen if a school should use their money, for example, and not have a surplus to be taxed, for a lack of a better word, at $2 a student? Can you take us through that so we can better understand?
So thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So the intention, when we had that discussion around the by-election for Ward 12, I think it is, 11, okay, thank you, sorry, was that the offset to the cost from the city of Toronto would be the reduction of the school budget carryover by average of $2 per pupil. So what we will do at year end is look to see what those carry forwards are. And hopefully, I mean, there are some schools that have deficits, and we'll have to decide as staff if we will go, $2.25, but our intention would be to do it for the most part to every school at $2. And depending on how severe it would be for a school in deficit, we may not take it from them, because again, remember that in the next school year, they get their new allocation. So for example, if we were taking $2 per student and our school had 400 students, that'd be $800 negative balance when they start the year, but they get a significant amount of money coming in the new year. But we will look at the large deficits and ensure that we aren't creating undue hardship to those schools when we do that calculation at year end.
Okay, thank you. I'll take back the chair. Thank you, sir. And seeing no other questions, I require a mover and a seconder for receipt. Sorry. We haven't had a mover or seconder, so we've had a late request from Trustee Lee, which we'll honor. Trustee Lee.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Chair. And through you, I will be really quick. Just as a follow-up question to the Ward 11 by-election, did we ever get a response from the ministry on whether or not we can use our proceeds of disposition to cover for the election to the staff?
Through the chair, there was no official answer, but in conversation, it was basically we would have to go through the formal request, and there was a reminder that our initial use of the 28 million has not officially been approved yet. So we took that as unlikely.
Okay. Are we still going to try, through Mr. Chair?
So through the chair, if trustees would like us to formally request to use proceeds of disposition to cover the cost of the election, then we absolutely can make that request.
And sorry, I thought I'll be quick, but just last question, I promise. What do we have to do to, through Mr. Chair, ask direct staff to do this? Is that a motion, or is that just?
Staff is indicating that they would require a motion to do that, a direction from the committee that ultimately approved by the board.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair, is it possible for me through this committee move a motion from Business Arising to direct staff to request for the use of proceeds of disposition to cover the Ward 11 by-election, so that we don't have to reduce potentially school funding to cover the cost?
Have you had an opportunity to email us, Trustee Lee, what you had in mind, or are we just winging it here?
I'm just winging it because I didn't expect this conversation to come up, but I can definitely send a really quick email. Yeah,
I'm being assured that we are told that we'd prefer the email. If you could take a minute.
Who should I send?
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, who should I send? Who should I be sending this to?
Mandrika.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. We have a.
Trustee Earhart, you beat me. I was gonna be Trustee Lee's wingman. I was
Thank you, colleagues. I appreciate you all.
The bandwagon's getting full. Okay, so we'll set up a speakers list if while it's being prepared before we open the vote, so that we can actually see it. I think we understand the concept. Does anybody trustees want to speak to this? As the mover, Trustee Lee, do you want to take us through your intent or your motivation?
Yeah, thank you. Through Mr. Chair, I'll do this really quickly, and then I'll type up the motion. Team, and I appreciate Trustee Earhart and Dita Vitas for supporting me on this one. I'm passionate that we should do our best to maximize the amount of funding left to our schools, our principals, and students. And it pains me to have to divert funding away from our students to pay for election, which I truly believe is the right decision to make for the purpose of upholding democracy. But because we have a fairly large amount of money left in our balance when it comes to proceeds of disposition, and through my conversations with the board of the TLC, my understanding is that we are fairly safe in our funding position for that account. It will be a significantly smaller impact to our students and education if we can fund the election through that pot of money that we currently have access to instead of taking it away from the schools. So I appreciate, the support from the committee if you're supportive to ask our staff to try. And I hear the associate director very clearly, or is it still interim director right now? I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the timing is right now on staffing. But I hear very clearly that the ministry is reluctant, but I think we owe it to our students to try. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Lee. Trustee Earhart, you're next.
Thank you. Trustee Lee expressed all the reasons why I think this is worth trying, and I very much agree. I wanted to ask if procedurally we're okay to do this because the board made a decision. I can't recall if the board had decided on the use, like on the sourcing. I believe we had to make a decision on the sourcing. Are we allowed? This is a seek to motion, I'm guessing, and so that I would think procedurally we would be in order to seek to. It wouldn't be a wholesale reversal of a previous decision. What is that correct? And apologies, I have a child.
Okay, I'm going to declare a brief recess for 5 minutes. We will reconvene at 5:20 and we'll address that very notion. Thank you. Trustee Patel. Okay, I've got 5:20, so I'm hoping that we'll have had some trustees return. We'll try again with the roll call. Trustee DeVitis, have you joined us or rejoined us?
Yeah, I was here the whole time.
Okay,
I
thank
hear
you. Trustee Earhart? Trustee Hassan?
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Lee?
I'm here.
Trustee Patel? Trustee Wong?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you all. So we're good? Thank you. So we have returned from recess and we are formally back in session. To the question about whether the motion is in order, I've had an opportunity to speak with the director and to speak with staff. And we believe the motion is in order. So we're prepared to continue. Do you have anything further to add, Trustee Earhart, as the floor is yours?
No, thanks very much.
Thank you. Trustee Williams?
Thank you, and through the chair. I just have to say, I really appreciate Trustee Lee bringing forward this motion. Even though I'm not in a position to vote, I'm not on the standing committee, I really do support looking at funding sources to support that by-election that don't directly impact our schools and students. I don't know if it might be a bit preemptive to add an advocacy piece, you know, anticipating what the response to staff may be, that our chair be given the authorization to advocate for those funds, to use the proceeds of disposition for this purpose. Might be jumping the gun, but it was just a thought that came to me.
So
Like
chair of the committee or the chair of the board?
the chair of the board, the chair of the board.
And he's not with us at the moment.
And he's not with us at the moment.
So it's a little awkward to kind of commit him to something.
Yeah, but maybe down the road,
Right.
you know, this is a,
Circles back at board, we will have a chance to potentially to review it then, because we can't send it until it formally gets approved at board, and we may have an
yeah,
opportunity
of
then
course.
to engage with him about his intent or his willingness to proceed.
Thank you. So again, really appreciate this motion being put forward and fully support it.
Thank you, Trustee Williams. Trustee Dawson.
Thank you through the chair. I I just want to echo Trustee Williams' comments that I'm very appreciative of this motion. I really hope that the ministry does provide us with the authorization to use our proceeds of disposition, because the alternative was the decision to take away $2 per student from current school budgets, which was concerning to me at the time that that decision was made. I just along the lines of what Trustee Williams was asking about the role of the chair in this, because normally we would ask the chair to seek permission from the minister. So I just wondered why we're veering from that. Is it just because he's not here today, or was there another kind of thought process behind it just being a staff directive?
Director Zucker, can you share as to how this request would traditionally be made, whether it be through your office or through the chair's office?
Through the chair, it's usually staff that deals with ministries. It's staff to staff for the request of use of proceeds, but we do need board permission to use proceeds as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Does that address your concern, Trustee Dawson?
Sort of. Like I'm just not okay. So when you're saying we need board's approval to to use proceeds of disposition as well, this is our permission.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to confuse. When I indicated it needed all committee decisions that are made in committee ultimately need board approval. So this would, and staff, we are directing staff to act on our behalf. So this recommendation coming out of committee would be approved at board. And then if it's approved at board, then staff would be directed to act accordingly.
Okay, and so you're saying that at board, we could pull this and include a clause for the chair to take some action as well.
Yeah, if we were so inclined that option would exist, we would, there would be an opportunity at board to modify the motion to make an amendment. The chair would be present and be able to speak for himself on how comfortable he was or was not on the idea. But yeah, that opportunity would exist. We would have to pull it, but we can have 4 people pull it and then talk about it again and potentially offer an amendment. And then the will of the board would decide.
All right, thank you. And I do actually support more public discussion on this point and pulling it from board or for board as well. So I thank you for the context and the clarification.
Okay, thank you. And there's nobody else on the speakers list. Trustee Lee, did you want an opportunity 3 minutes to wrap?
No, I want to once again express, although through you, Mr. Chair, my sincere appreciations to the supportiveness of my colleagues. And I think this is very valuable. And I want to, once again, I know this is more work for staff, but I want to appreciate your time and efforts as well. But that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Trustee Lee. So again, we have a business arising motion that the staff will seek permission from the Ministry of Education to use proceeds from disposition to cover the cost of the Ward 11 by-election. And we have a mover, Trustee Lee, and a seconder, Trustee Earhart. Can we open the vote, please?
These in favor.
Trustee Earhart in favor.
Trustee Didivis and Trustee Patel.
In favor.
Trustee Patel in favor.
Thank you both, gentlemen. And that passes 7-0. So now I need a mover and seconder for receipt. Trustee Hassan will move.
Happy to second. Trustee Earhart.
Trustee Earhart will second. Can we open the vote, please?
These in favor.
Patel in favor.
And that passes 7-0. So next agenda item is item 5.4. It's our last report of the night. It's the update on the 2023-2024 status of reserves. It was on page 25 of the agenda, and this will be for receipt. And it's my understanding that Executive Officer Schneider will take us through this.
Thank you, Chair. And this will just be brief because we did discuss some of this in our previous report. This attention to this report is just to go through a little bit more detail of the reserves that are available. So I'm going to be referring all my comments to page 26 of the agenda tonight. And the first one I want to highlight is our working funds are at a nil balance. Working funds are traditionally the funds that don't have a sweatered purpose and are there to support unexpected needs that arise at a board as it's operating. Typically, for a school board, they should have a 2 to 3% operating reserve. And at this point, we do not have any. So just want to make that point. The benefit funds reserve is also nil balance. We used that to help balance last year. And this fund was intended to cover any fluctuations in our future employee benefit cost. As a result of not having this reserve, if there's an unexpected additional expense for future employee benefits when our actuaries do the work, that cost will hit the bottom line directly at this point in time. The school support fund we talked about earlier is that a carry forward of school balances from one year to the next. So this $13.3 million is the money available to schools from their last year budget to use during this current school year. And again, it'll be reset at the end of this year based on whatever balances are carried forward. The challenge will be if we ever have to use this reserve to cover off the general operating deficit, we'd be in the same situation that if the schools were to spend all the money, that we would be hitting the bottom line with it. The next one is the Environmental Legacy Fund. This was originally set up using carbon credits several years ago to do sustainability projects to create a better environmentally friendly organization. The last reserve that is available to cover the cost is the Artificial Turf Fund. And this reserve was set up using a permit revenue from artificial turfs for the sustainment of those turf fields when they need to be refurbished. All those three funds I talked about are available and would have to be used should the board experience a deficit that can't be covered. The last one there you'll see on the page 26 is the sinking fund interest. It's a restricted reserve. It has to do with accounting entries and is not available to support a deficit that arrive at the board. And through you, Mr. Chair, that's the end of this report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Executive Officer Schneider. I'll give trustees a moment to indicate whether they have a question or not. Hearing and seeing none, I need a mover and seconder for receipt, please.
Oh, Trustee Earhart, I had a quick question. Sorry.
Trustee
Can you hear me
Earhart.
okay? Yes, I apologize. I wanted to ask here. Apologies. I wanted to ask staff about financial management, and I know it was shared very clearly what the implications are, but I'm wondering what the reserve should ideally be. Is it possible to get a sense of that? And thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would say the 2 to 3% reserve. So that would be between $60 to $90 million reserve for a board our size would be something that we should have at some point. I think 2% would be a good minimum. And at 2%, that's roughly $60 million. That gives the board the flexibility should an unforeseen event happen that they have the financial resources to offset it.
Okay, and my understanding is that's approximately the reserves that the board had in place prior to pandemic declarations 5 years ago. Is that a correct understanding? Thank you.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, that the reserves have been constantly drawn down and we're at this level. We can provide that as part of the budget process in 25, 26, giving historical trends on the reserves.
Okay, thank you. And just, I know I ask this almost every time, but I always think it bears, it's a benefit to have it repeated on the public record. Is the Ministry of Education aware that that we have depleted reserves due to pandemic expenditures? I know we've made the request, but they see monthly because they're meeting with staff monthly about the financial situation. Am I correct in that understanding?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, the ministry is aware of our reserve status, and as a result of our reserve status and financial position, we are required to submit monthly reporting to them around our financial position.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, we have had to share I'm not sure when those would have begun, but we would have shared, it's now in the dozens of monthly reports citing like the trajectory of going into these reserves and depleting these reserves. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, mostly through our monthly and through our revised budgets and revised our estimates as well as our financial statements and in multiple communications staff to staff. They are well aware of both our reserve status and our financial position.
Okay, thank you very much. I know I have asked that question before. I appreciate you taking the time to answer it again. And I'll just state again for the record how unfortunate I think it is that the ministry and the government is not hearing this call. I do know, and I know we as a board have passed a motion, but to anyone who's watching, there is an open budget survey right now in the Ontario government. You just have to Google Ontario budget 2025 and you'll be taken to a survey. One of the things there is education. My understanding is you can put that you would like to see education funding. You could specify other to specify the TDSB and help make us whole. I personally think it's very important for our board and all boards who are in this situation coming out of the pandemic, and particularly as we're moving to the 5-year anniversary of this completely unbelievable circumstance that brought us to this place. And just thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. Seeing no further trustees on the list, I need a mover and seconder for receipt. Trustee Hassan will move. Can I have a seconder, please?
Trustee Dovitis.
Trustee DeVitis, thank you, sir. Can we open the vote, please?
Trustee Lees in favor.
Trustee Patel in favor.
Trustee DeVitis? Oh, he's good. We're good. That passed 7-0. Thank you. What's left? The last is item number 6, which is adjournment. Can I have a mover and seconder for adjournment?
I can do it.
Thank you, sir.
Second.
Trustee Wong will second. All in favor? Any opposed? Hearing none, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your contributions. Wish everyone a good night.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Chair, for a very efficient meeting.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all. Good evening.